As many of you may know, some of the most requested stories in the comment sections are Wendigos and Skinwalkers. A few subscribers sent in some of their stories for me to share to you. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, whether it be with a Wendigo, a Skinwalker, or anything else creepy, be sure to send it into the email or the website that you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story. Let's get into these incredibly creepy tales of Wendigos and Skinwalkers. These ones will surely give you nightmares tonight. First off, I'd like to let you know it's taboo to speak of them, or the others as it brings them after you. That said, here's my story. It was 25 years ago. I lived on the reservation with my family, and I was out with some friends. We went down to the creek to have a day of reed picking, and we were enjoying listening to the sounds of nature. I couldn't resist trying to catch a little frog I saw. I reached out to catch it, and it hopped away. Well, as I was expecting that, I started back a bit, and I fell forward and landed against a small boulder and sprained my ankle. I tried to get up, and I couldn't because my foot had swelled up really bad. I couldn't even take off my shoe or sock at this point. My friends came over to sit with me and figure out how we were going to get back to the adobe. There were 7 of us, and we were all too scared to walk back alone due to our parents always telling us never to leave each other at all costs. We were trying to think what to do when we were at a loss. We went silent for a while, and that's when we all noticed that the animals around us were quiet as well. We all thought nothing of it, and continued to think about the life and how we were going to get back to the adobe. I was apologizing for the 100th time when we heard a noise. I jumped and screamed out in pain. My friend, she grabbed my arm and told me to put my weight on her shoulders, and then another friend joined her. I'm between 2 of my friends limping along the pathway when we hear another noise, kind of like a fire popping noise, and yet no fire around for half a mile. Well, we stopped and we listened, and then a smell so bad and nauseating overcame us. I'm not even sure how to say how it smelled. It was kind of dead and rotted, like a fresh metallic smell mixed in with a little bit of garbage. What I'd say, this was definitely puzzling, as it wasn't no Bigfoot or anything like that. There was no wildlife we knew that smelled like that either. We were scared, and honestly, really freaked out. We decided my friend Scotty was going to investigate and find out what was causing the smell. We were fixating and arguing with him because we didn't want him to go. The smell became so strong, we all vomited, and we couldn't breathe without an overwhelming, disgusting, nauseous feeling overwhelming us. You may think I'm nuts, and at this point I wouldn't blame you, but I'm telling you this right now. This is the God's honest truth. When I was able to stop the nausea and vomiting, I looked up from between my friend's shoulders and saw the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. Right on a hill in front of us, about 1.5 yards away, stood a Skinwalker. He was starting towards us and making hardly any sound at all. We'd been warned about them and we knew we were going to have to get away from here. I decided, pain or not, I was going to just suck it up and run as best as I could. I wasn't going to let my friends go down because of me. I let go of their shoulders. I took a deep breath and I started to run as fast as I could. I really don't know how or why, but I was too focused on the running from him, but I barely felt my ankle at this point. We were all at a dead run down the path across the fields and finally reached the adobe. We all ran in, gasping for breath, and my mom and my friends' moms looked at us asking what had happened to us. We were so freaked out and running, as the hounds had been after us. Well, Sarah caught her breath first and started to ramble on about what had happened. I started calming down and collapsed and cringed from my sprained ankle. My mom came over with Mary Ann, my cousin's sister-in-law, and both started to work on my ankle. I got chided for being clumsy and trying to mess with wildlife. I was so badly in pain I wanted to scream. I asked if I could have some water, and my mom gave me a little bit. She told me to drink slowly as I get sick if I drink too fast. My sister and brothers came in and we were told to go get healing herbs from the shaman. I was passing in and out of awareness, and I could barely hear bits and pieces of my friends telling their stories about our ordeal. I must have passed out since when I woke up I was in my bed and my mom was sitting in a corner, churning bread to cook for dinner. She immediately came to my bedside and said the shaman had been here to see me, and he said I'll be fine. We all should be okay. He didn't think we were affected by the bad spirit, but we need to follow orders in order to stay safe from now, as he thinks it may be a warning to us. I still wonder to this day who he was and why he was warning us and about what. I will never know, but I since then have moved and grown up. But I never have and never will mess with wildlife for any reason unless it's to save a life. I'll just watch it from a distance and enjoy its beauty. I'm not in any hurry to be punished by the evil spirits for doing evil things. I prefer to be an okay person and to just worship our great spirit, our creator. You may not believe me, but I will tell you this one. Don't speak about them, and don't let them possess you or kill you. Never in my life could I predict something like this would ever happen to me. You're probably wondering if I experienced a traumatic event such as a mugging, home invasion, car accident, or probably that I received shocking news from my doctor that I have some sort of cancer. Honestly, I would have preferred any of those events compared to the horror that I recently faced. Before I go any further, understand that I'm not crazy, nor am I under the influence of any mind-altering drugs. No one around me believed anything that happened, nor what I saw that night, so my words are all I have as I give my recollection within this story. Cindy was an extraordinary girl, beautiful as a rose, and always kind-hearted since the day she moved in next door. We met when we were both kids, and she would often come visit me to play and hang out, or vice versa. Both my parents and hers would become close. The more Cindy and I's friendship grew, that was. By our mid-teens, we were officially a couple, a perfect match. After high school, we both went to different colleges, but our bond and love for each other was still strong despite the distance between us. Now, in our 20s, I was offered the job that I'd been desperately yearning for in Los Angeles. Since we lived in New Mexico, I obviously had to relocate. Although I had my own place, Cindy was still living with her parents at the time while working at a daycare. The last thing I wanted to do was disrupt her future career plans, but I loved her way too much to be away from her. So I asked her to come with me. Despite this being the first time she'd be away from her home and her parents, she willingly agreed. I decided to first take a trip out to California to meet my new boss and, more importantly, find a new apartment within the city closer to work before I officially moved there. Both Cindy and I chose to make a vacation out of it and a road trip out west. We left early that morning, hoping to reach our destination within a couple of days. Everything had a joyous feel about it. We were both excited and overall happy about starting our new lives. The morning had soon turned to evening, as we crossed the state line into Arizona and made our way through the more deserted and rural areas. It was nearing the end of the day as dusk finally set in. We were the only people, or so it seemed, driving down the highway with the vast desert and darkness surrounding us. I could only see as far as my headlights would allow, when suddenly, a huge dog stepped onto the road. I swerved the car just in time to avoid hitting the animal before stopping. With the abrupt stop, I accidentally sprained my wrist against the steering wheel. However, that wasn't the odd thing about it. The dog, which caused us to steer off the road, calmly made its way in front of the car once more. Its eyes glared in the headlights as it stared undisturbed at us. Both Cindy and I were lost for words as we could do nothing but stare back in utter surprise. This encounter lasted less than a minute before the dog bared its teeth in a low grumble before turning its back to us and darting off into the darkness. Needless to say, this was beyond the doubt the weirdest thing that I had experienced thus far. Rather than dwelling on the incident, I glanced over at Cindy to tell her that she'd have to drive the rest of the way as my wrist was aching from the sprain. We pulled into a gas station off the lonely highway to get some supplies and bandages to tie my wrist. Cindy went into the rest stop while I pumped the gas. As I was waiting for Cindy to fill the tank, out of nowhere, I heard the faintest grumbling sound. I peered around but saw nothing but the dark that engulfed the desert. I peered into the rest stop to see Cindy now making a purchase from the attendant when the grumble started again. I quickly turned around, and out in the distance, not 50 feet away, I spotted the very same large dog. However, it took off not 2 seconds after it somehow realized I saw it. This was indeed freaky, considering we were at least 2 to 3 miles from any point in the highway in which this incident occurred. In no way could a dog cover that distance in such a short amount of time. I tried to convince myself that what I saw was just a mere coincidence, but eerie nonetheless. I ushered Cindy to hurry up, without raising concern, as I didn't want to freak her out. Seeing as it was already late and my wrist was aching with pain, I decided that we should just call it a day and hit the road again in the morning. There was a motel less than a mile away from the gas station of which we decided to bunk down for the night. With there being a few occupancies, we were able to get a reasonable sized room as I helped Cindy unload our luggage from the car, all the while still not mentioning the strange occurrence. As we settled in, I was able to scrounge up some ice from the motel's dispenser to try and decrease the swelling of my wrist. As I lay on the bed and tried to relax, Cindy kept rifling through her handbag in concern. As it so happened, she had forgotten her credit card back at the gas station. She was adamant about going back and getting it, as she was convinced that it might have slipped out of her purse as she rushed out of the store. She was a little worried and concerned, so I opted to go back to the gas station and see if I could find it for her, but she chose to go herself as I was in no condition to drive. I tried to convince her that I was capable of driving regardless of my hand, but she insisted. I also offered to go with her, seeing as it was late and all the weird occurrences that had happened thus far, but my efforts were futile once more. The gas station was less than a mile away and visible from our motel, so I knew Cindy wouldn't be gone long. Finally, easing the pain in my wrist with some ice, I accidentally dozed off while watching TV. When I awoke, however, it was an hour later and Cindy had not returned yet nor called. I tried reaching her, but it would continuously ring without an answer. After calling her a couple more times, but to no avail, I went over to the front desk to check with the night manager as to whether he had seen Cindy since we checked in together. Apart from seeing her leave the parking lot an hour earlier, he assured me that he hadn't seen her return. My worry soon transitioned into fear. Although the manager offered to call the police, I told him that I'd check the gas station to see if I could find her there before we alert the authorities. Cell phone usage is not permitted around the vicinity of gas pumps, so there was a possible reason she wasn't answering. I chose to walk over to the station, since it was under a mile, which would approximately take me 15 to 20 minutes if I hurried. Reluctantly, I began to trek down the dark highway, guiding my path with the use of my flashlight. I tried desperately to stay positive, conceiving every possible excuse in my mind as to why Cindy had been absent for so long. The further along I went, I came across tire marks on the road as if a car had veered off the highway. Using my flashlight, I followed the irregular tracks just a few feet ahead until it trailed off the road. As I shone my light out into the darkness, off the side where the tracks led, my worst fear suddenly materialized. I saw the tail end of my car, at least 30 feet off the road. I immediately ran up to see if Cindy was inside, God forbid, badly injured due to the accident. As I came up to the driver's side of the car, it was evident that it was empty. I frantically looked around and yelled for Cindy a couple of times. As I circled the vehicle, I noticed the keys were still in the ignition. The front windshield was smashed, and the front tire was flat, but no signs of actual collision. The only other major damage to the car was a huge dent on the hood, as if someone had dropped an anvil on it. I scrambled to dial 911 on my phone, but for some strange reason, I chose to call Cindy one last time. As her phone kept ringing, I constantly was on the lookout for any cars passing by. I tried calling again, but as I was frantically looking around, a faint light caught my attention at least 20 feet from the car. I hastily approached the object on the desert floor, and as the light in question came into recognition, I realized it was Cindy's phone which I had been calling. I dropped to my knees and picked it up, thinking the worst as my eyes swelled up with tears. In my brief moment of grief, I heard someone call my name further out in the distance. I stood back up and tried to listen closely as, this time, I heard my name called again. The voice became clearer as whoever was saying it was becoming closer. Focusing my eyes, I could see a figure in the distance closing in. I called out to it, but when the reply came, I realized it was Cindy's voice. I bolted toward her, feeling a sigh of relief. I pointed my flashlight at the figure and began to slow my pace, noticing Cindy walking toward me in a weird way. One of her legs was dragging as she propelled herself with the other, whilst one of her arms was waving at me in a kind of strange manner. At first, I thought she was hurt from the accident, but the closer I got, the more fearful I became. Something didn't seem right about her as I stopped in my tracks and watched as she extended her arm toward me and began tilting her head from side to side. Whatever this thing only feet away from me was, it sure as hell wasn't my girlfriend. The being that appeared as Cindy kept calling my name as it moved in closer and closer. Its body began contorting in weird positions as trying to act more human. That didn't catch my attention more so than whatever it was. It also wore Cindy's clothes, it looked like, except they were inside out. I slowly began to back away, keeping my light on it. I can only speculate that it somehow became aware that I realized it wasn't who it was pretending to be, as its eyes glared a bright red and the grumbling sound of a wild dog escaped its mouth. The gas station wasn't too far up the highway, but if I were to make it, I'd have to run like hell. Before I could even plan my escape, the thing dropped to the ground on all fours, as its body began to contort more rapidly, and I even heard its limbs snap. I took that as my cue to run. The moment as I back onto the highway, I bolted toward the gas station in full speed. I could hear the creature give off a blood-curdling cry from where I left it, a cry between that of a woman's scream and the howl of a wolf. I ran as fast as my feet would carry me, all whilst the cries echoed in the dark. For a moment, I could hear the faint panting of a wild dog giving chase almost parallel to the road alongside me. Whether it was chasing me or not, I was just a few short feet away from the gas station. There were no cars at any of the pumps as I hurried into the gas station store so frantically that I tripped onto the floor the moment I burst through the doors. The attendee rushed over to me to see if I was alright, but I was more focused on whether that creature had followed. I glared at the outside and its surroundings as I stood to my feet drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. The attendee kept trying to get my attention and asking me if everything was okay, but I didn't even acknowledge him until I realized that there was no sign of that thing anywhere. I stepped outside briefly only to hear the still silence and the occasional rustling of the desert wind. Finally, directing my attention to the gas station attendee, I immediately asked him as to whether he had seen my girlfriend return. I tried explaining that she was missing as well as being chased by some weird creature on my way here. He asked her name, but when I told him, he froze for a moment, then reached behind the counter drawer and pulled out Cindy's credit card. The same card she was supposed to return for after he handed it to me. The realization that something horrible had happened to my girlfriend settled in. I ushered him to call the police, whom arrived at the gas station about 15 minutes later. I recounted everything that happened to the police except for my encounter with whatever that creature was. How could I possibly explain what I saw and not be thought of as a mental case? I was shaken to my core, but had to remain sane for the sake of finding the real Cindy. I led the police to the site of the car wreck and the motel where the rest of Cindy's belongings were. The cops launched a full search and investigation of the sudden disappearance, while I was taken in for questioning that very night as being labeled the only suspect. Video surveillance at both locations revealed the time when Cindy left the motel, but never arrived at the gas station. Since I refused to recount my encounter with the fake Cindy, all fingers pointed towards me as the primary suspect, though I was ultimately released from the precinct due to lack of compelling evidence that implicated me with her disappearance. I still felt like the guilty one though. Had I stopped her from leaving the motel room that night, Cindy would still be here. After some time, the search officially concluded, and Cindy's name was added to the state's list of missing persons. Her parents still cling to the hope that their daughter is missing rather than dead, even months after the incident. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and I'm half Cherokee, from Georgia. At the time that this story took place, my fiance and I were living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property, and were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 at the time that this took place, and the only other residents in our home were myself, my fiance, and our cat and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I'd rescued because I can't say no to animals that need help, and our dog was my loyal pit bull, who was a sweet, cuddly scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and scared of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about a half a mile long. So usually, when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk, and usually I brought my fiance with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing games and all. I like him using his legs. After our driveway was a 12-mile long road through the woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say we were far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The rest of it were miles of wheat fields and solid forest for 2 more miles. Now that you have a bit of layout, on to the really creepy bit. So, it started off like any other weekday evening. My fiance and I returned home from work to our happy cottage and happy pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go out for a walk, so I quieted her and changed her into her walking clothes, and I asked if my fiance wanted to come with me. He had gotten home shortly after me and said he had seen one of the coyotes that we have had around close to the field by our house. As you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I am very capable of defending myself. I caught him a puss, and then told Harley that we could go and that we would be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking toward the driveway. The sun was going down, and the October air had started to get a chill to it, and it rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year, and impossible to see through, so I assumed that my fiance was just trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in this field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks. On our way up to the driveway, I knew that was as big of a coward as she was, that she would alert me if there was any danger coming, and she would very quickly run away. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high about the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of the field. The first field was soybeans, and if you don't know, they are relatively short plants that nothing but a rabbit could hide in, and off in the distance, I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I threw a stick at Harley, and she brought it back. We do this over and over again, a typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit that had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. As much as I hate to say this, there was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it's probably what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt down by it, using my knife quickly, and put it out of its misery, as my family had taught me, and let it pass into my next life. Feeling sad, but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part that you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat on our left and the forest on our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me, and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back towards the forest. Coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack, they get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her heckles, and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! Fuck off!" as loud as I could at the coyotes. They started scattering off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup, because I am brave, but I'm not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back, and again I heard a rustling in the wheat. A confused coyote, maybe. I thought that it must be, but no. Harley was standing stock still staring at the wheat, and I whistled for her to come to me. That high-pitched, ear-piercing 2-finger whistle. That snapped her out of it for a second, when my whistle was returned from the inside of the wheat. All of a sudden, all of the family legend I had heard came flooding back to me, and I expected to see a tall, thin creature emerge, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead, I was transfixed with fear and curiosity. I whistled again. The whistle was returned again. Very human sounding, but at the same time, not. Against my better judgment, I said, "Hello?" My own voice replied, "Hello?" My hand on my knife, I said, "Show yourself!" Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no Harley noises, just my own breath. Slowly, the rustling started again, and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field, and what I saw confuses me to this day. Animal eyes, that green-yellow reflection of light, was cast back at me, but what it was connected to didn't make sense. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deerskin or fur, and she was naked otherwise. She was very thin, and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheaten leaves. Under any circumstances, I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment, she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been a solid minute or so, but felt like much longer, until I heard the unmistakable coyote howl from the forest. Both our heads snapped toward the noise, and I immediately heard her take off through the wheat toward the sound. At that same moment, Harley took off toward our house, and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway, and I stopped not wanting my fiancé to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance, and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and I didn't tell my fiancé about it, as to not want him to think that I was crazy. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it was right to hunt her. I was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't unusual, but now I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had stopped obsessing about that night, and I almost thought I had imagined it when I slammed on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and my headlights hit its eyes and reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote. It just stared at my car for a moment and then ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I've always been an outdoors kind of guy. I love to camp and hike and spend most of my time outside. Now, I'm not oblivious. I know to take precautions such as carrying a knife and letting someone know where I'm going. Usually, I'll go with my Bernese mountain dog, but on this occasion, I was with friends. I heard of Wendigos and all of that before, but I had not ever seen anything out of the ordinary, so I assumed they were just that, stories. Me and my friends would joke about it sometimes. The Wendigo is going to get you. But I never talked about it when going into the woods. My friends and I decided to go on a trip deep in the woods. I don't like to go to campgrounds, so that way we can really be out there. For the sake of names, it was me, my friend Anthony, and Victor. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred, although as we drove as far as we could into the woods and hiked onto the trail for about another 2 miles. As we hiked, I sensed something was off. I shook the feeling off as maybe an animal was around. I'm sometimes sensitive to energies. As we settled at our campground, Victor and I were taking pictures of the scenery, and Anthony, of course, was helping himself to his 12-pack of beer. I know, alcoholic or nah. Anyways, as the night carried on, Anthony began ranting about some girl who broke his heart and getting all into his feelings, and I tried to change the subject by telling some scary camping stories. In the middle of a story, we heard some branches crack nearby, and I got silent. I do this to see if it's an animal like a bear. Victor then said, "Maybe we should try to make some noises to scare it off." And Anthony, 6 beers in, begins loudly saying, "Bro, it's probably the Wendigo. Hey Wendigo, come get me, drink bitch." I reply, "Anthony, are you one of those guys that just does stupid shit like this? Calm down, dude, we're probably on native land at this point." The national forest we were on was a borderline of a reservation. Anthony said that he was gonna fuck shit up if he saw it, and talking nonsense like that. Fast forward, me and Anthony are just by the fire, while Victor was in the tent getting ready to go to sleep. As me and Anthony talk about his ex-girlfriend problems, he tells me he has to take a piss. So I go with him to make sure he doesn't fall or something. He had too many shots to even walk right. And as I'm waiting for him to finish, I hear Victor's voice, but it sounded different. "Anthony, help me." It repeats this 2 more times, the exact same tone as if it was robotic. At this moment, I knew it was either Victor or something else. Again, I am aware of native folklore, and I know not to risk answering to whatever was calling us. I tell Anthony, "Did you hear that?" Anthony asked me, "What?" "Nothing. I don't know." I wait a few more seconds, and nothing happens. Now, I took this as me being paranoid. I did smoke a little bit of weed, so maybe I was just psyching myself out. When we got back, Victor was outside by the fire telling us he can't sleep. Now keep in mind, we are in a field of grass by the tree line. I thought it was a cool spot to see the stars at night. As we talked, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A deer. I remember seeing one before finding the clearing and thought maybe it was the same one as before. Guess we had a friend following us. Well, I soon found out it was no friend. My friends saw me looking at the deer doing its thing in the field eating grass. Me looking back at my friends, guess we have a visitor. Victor said, "A Wendigo," laughing, and of course Anthony says, "I swear if that's one, I'm killing it," and he starts screaming at it again. Anthony, leave the freaking deer alone. At this point, we aren't paying attention to the deer and are just talking face to face by the fire when I glanced back and the deer was gone. Like, not gone from the spot, but vanished. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but then Anthony gets up and shouts, "Wendigo!" And as soon as he says it, I see the deer peeking behind a tree. As I make eye contact with it, it opens its mouth and speaks. It said, in the most inhuman, distorted voice I had ever heard, "Anthony, help me." I froze. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. My friends noticed this and turned around to face the deer, which was standing on 2 legs and about 8 feet tall. Its mouth opened more, revealing sharp teeth, and it screams in this maniacal laughter. We took off into the woods, not even caring about our campsite. Thankfully, we were right by the trail that we took to get there, and as I'm running faster than I ever have before, I turn to see that this thing is following us, saying, "Anthony, come here," in a demonic voice. We split up to make this thing lose us somehow, and by some stroke of luck I found somewhere to hide under a huge fallen tree and crawled into it with Victor. As we sit there staying quiet as we possibly can, we hear heavy footsteps and heavy breathing. Then luckily, it continued on. After what felt like an eternity, we got out and desperately hoped that Anthony was still around. We decided to head to the truck, and thank God Anthony was there, locked inside it. We got in and got the hell out of there, but before we took off we heard the most haunting scream that echoed across the room. Safe to say, I'm never taking him camping again, and I don't think he wants to go after that experience. I uploaded a story in January and sent it to you about a possible Wendigo lurking around my house. I'm sending this to you again because it has reappeared, and I'm not sure if it's alone. This happened around April 10th. The sun was just beginning to rise, and I was walking around the property checking on all the pigs like usual. Most of them were lazing about in the hay, but I noticed as I slowly made my way out back, the pigs that were restless and making noises. Letting you all know now that I had a machete that I shoved in my belt at the time. That was because of an increasing issue with coyotes, as well as the paranoia from my encounter a few months prior. Wondering what the problem was, I crept as quietly as I could out back, my hand hovering over the machete's handle as I did so. Peering over the crest of the hill, I'm greeted with nothing but agitated pigs pacing in their pens. I grunted, standing up straight and making my way up to the pens. "What's wrong, Latte?" I asked one of the pigs, scratching her head for comfort. She kept turning her head to look at the woods, making loud squeaks and whines in the process. Looking at some of the younger pigs, I noticed that they were doing the same thing. Despite feeling nervous, it was my job to see what was bothering them. So, swallowing hard, I make my way to the tree line, peering into the woods. As I'm looking around, I hear a branch break off to my right, my head whipping around to face the sound. Practically crawling up a steep muddy ledge was what looked like the creature from before, except its pale skin was stained with what looked like blood, and it looked like it had been in a fight. One of its antlers were snapped in half, and patches of its fur and skin were hanging off of it. I must have made some sort of sound, because its head turned to face me. It gazes locked into mine. The only few seconds that I got to stare at this thing felt like an eternity, before it screamed at me and scuttled up the ledge as fast as it could, disappearing over the top. As soon as I couldn't see it, I hightailed it back to the house, slamming the door shut and locking it. If it was the same creature as before, I want to know what could have done that to it, but at the same time, I don't. Frankly, it terrifies me to think that there might be something else out there, something with enough strength and guts to attack something like that. Just hoping I'm overreacting and it was hit by a vehicle and not attacked by something else. Thanks for watching this video. Good to see that you made it to the end. I'm sure that you got a few spooks, or at least I hope you did. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button, as it helps these videos grow. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and hit that notification button to never miss a new video? I upload videos like this one almost every single day. If you have a story that you'd like to send in and hear in a future video, be sure to send it into the website or the email that you can find in the description down below. Also, if you want to help support the channel outside of just liking and watching the videos, be sure to check out the merch store that you can find at the top of the description. Some cool shirts that you might want to wear this winter.